In a war, the last thing that any military should do, whether they are the aggressor or defender, is purposefully target civilians. But Russia doesn't care about any of the modern rules of warfare. All that it, and especially Vladimir Putin, cares about is inflicting as much damage as it can against Ukraine, no matter who or what is the victim of the damage. Russia proved that when it deployed one of its most terrifying ballistic missiles against Ukrainian civilians, but Ukraine hit back. Not by targeting civilians, as Putin did, but by delivering a revenge strike that was instant, brutal, and left parts of Russia in total chaos. On January 9th, the BBC was among many outlets to break the news that Russia had conducted a missile strike against Ukraine and its citizens. Sadly, that alone isn't revelatory news. It seems that Putin orders as many strikes on Ukraine's cities as he does on its military infrastructure. What is news, terrifyingly so, is that Russia used the Oreshnik ballistic missile as part of a massive overnight strike, marking only the second time that the missile has been used in Ukraine and potentially the first time that it was used with the express intent of killing those that it struck. Oreshnik is the last missile that Ukraine wants Putin firing at its people. In its report on Russia's strike, Al Jazeera classifies the Oreshnik as an intermediate-range ballistic missile and says that its name means hazel tree in Russian. However, far from bearing life, the Oreshnik delivers death on a dramatic scale. The name was given to the missile due to how it deploys its warheads, which fall in streaks of light onto a target, thus resembling the tree in question. Ukraine won't care about such shoddy symbolism. What Ukraine worries about more is that the Oreshnik is among what appears to be Russia's growing arsenal of hypersonic missiles, against which even modern air defense systems, barring perhaps the Patriot, can do very little. Oreshnik is believed to be capable of reaching speeds of at least Mach 5, with CNN noting that it may be able to travel as quickly as 13,000 kilometers or about 8,000 miles per hour. That would put the missile's top speed at over Mach 10, comfortably twice as fast as needed to achieve the hypersonic designation, and potentially more than 10 times the speed of sound. Adding to this immense speed is the Oreshnik's range. According to CNN, Russia's few uses of the missile indicate that it has a range of between 965 and 1,609 kilometers, or between 600 and 1,000 miles. However, the same outlet notes that US defense officials have stated that the missile may have a much longer actual range, potentially exceeding 4,800 or around 3,000 miles. There seems to be no official confirmation of this estimate yet. If it turns out to be true, Russia could use Oreshnik to target all of Ukraine and huge swathes of Europe, making this powerful, fast, and nuclear-capable missile a clear threat well beyond the confines of the Ukraine war. Perhaps more terrible than the missile itself is its ability to rain multiple warheads down onto a target. CNN says that the Oreshnik may carry as many as 6 multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles or MIRVs, and that each of these MIRVs may carry between 4 and 6 ordnance themselves. Assuming the maximum numbers are accurate, this gives Oreshnik the potential to drop 36 warheads onto multiple or single targets. That's bad enough when the missiles carry conventional explosives. However, it's from a class of missiles whose speed and capability echo the nuclear threat, CNN reports, and it seems likely that the missile could indeed be loaded with nuclear warheads should Russia choose. We tell you all of this to impress upon you the devastating potential carried within the Oreshnik. With that context, some might say that Ukraine was somewhat lucky to get out of the overnight strike on January 9th with as few casualties as it did. Sadly, there were casualties, including deaths. In Kyiv, 4 people were killed, with another 25 being injured, BBC reports. Among those killed was a paramedic attending the scene at a damaged apartment building. Ukraine later reported that Russia's strike on Kyiv was a double-tap hit, though it's unclear which weapons Russia used in the attack on Ukraine's capital. As for the Oreshnik, Al Jazeera reports that Russia claims that it struck the city of Lviv with its hypersonic missile. That city is about 550 kilometers or around 340 miles away from Kyiv. Worryingly, from the European perspective, Lviv is also only 70 kilometers or about 45 miles away from the border that Ukraine shares with Poland. Perhaps Putin wanted to send a message to his European enemies. Tonight it was Lviv, tomorrow it could be Poland. Returning to Ukraine, the deaths we mentioned also occurred on a night when Russia fired much more than Oreshnik missiles at Ukraine. According to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, Russia launched an additional 13 ballistic missiles at Ukraine overnight, which targeted both energy and civilian infrastructure. Russia also unleashed 22 cruise missiles and 242 drones in what ended up being a massive overnight raid that was overshadowed by the deployment of the Oreshnik for what seems to be only the second time since the war began. Russia claims that this strike was about revenge. Toward the end of December, Russia accused Ukraine of launching a long-range drone attack on one of Putin's residences. Specifically, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov claimed that Ukraine had launched an attack involving 91 unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, at Putin's state residence in the Novgorod region. Zelensky immediately denied this and claimed that Russia was making this claim in an effort to derail peace negotiations, an assertion seemingly supported by the BBC's report that Russia claimed that it would review its position in peace negotiations in the wake of Ukraine's supposed strike. Did Ukraine attack Putin's residence with drones, or did Russia stage the attack? We may never discover the answers to these questions, though it's clear from Russia's many strikes against Ukraine since Putin launched his invasion that the country doesn't need any sort of excuse to hit Ukraine with missiles and drones. Regardless, Russia says that revenge was on its mind, but it looks like those on the receiving end of that vengeance, along with those observing what Russia has done in Ukraine, don't believe a word. Taking to X in the wake of Russia's Oreshnik attack, the Vice President of the European Commission, Kaja Kallas, made it very clear that nobody in Europe is buying Russia's excuses. Russia doesn't want peace. Russia's reply to diplomacy is more missiles and destruction. This deadly pattern of recurring major Russian strikes will repeat itself until we help Ukraine break it, Kallas wrote on X, before adding, Russia's reported use of an Oreshnik missile is a clear escalation against Ukraine and meant as a warning to Europe and the US. Kallas' comments echo those made by Ukraine's Foreign Minister, Andriy Sybiha, who said, "Such a strike close to EU and NATO border is a grave threat to security on the European continent and a test for the transatlantic community." Sybiha added that Russia's president conjured this response because of his own hallucinations when referring to Ukraine's supposed attack on Putin's residence that may or may not have even happened. We mentioned earlier that Russia's Oreshnik strike was the second confirmed use of the missile in Ukraine's territory. The first took place in November 2024 in the wake of former US President Joe Biden granting Ukraine permission to use US-made ATACMS missiles at selected targets inside Russia. At the time, Russia claimed that it had struck a Ukrainian military facility with Oreshnik, perhaps intending the attack to serve as a warning that more would come if the US didn't withdraw the permission that it had just given to Ukraine. However, Al Jazeera says that this initial Oreshnik was equipped with dummy warheads, per Ukraine sources. Perhaps the November 2024 strike was intended as a test. Russia's January 9th attack may mean that it's ready to use more Oreshnik missiles in the future, which is especially bad news because Russia reportedly deployed Oreshnik missiles into Belarus on December 30th, 2025. From there, Russia could target practically anywhere in Ukraine, and may be able to hit several European targets, depending on which of the range figures that we mentioned earlier is accurate. Ukraine could have justifiably spent time trying to absorb and recover from Russia's combined Oreshnik, ballistic missile, cruise missile, and drone strike on January 9th, but that isn't Ukraine's way. Russia may have claimed that its Oreshnik attack was a form of vengeance, but the loss of yet more civilians meant that Ukraine had far more reasons to deliver a strong counterstrike. And on January 10th, Kyiv Post and Ukraine's General Staff reported that Ukraine had done just that. On that date, the General Staff took to Telegram to announce that Ukraine had targeted yet another of Russia's oil facilities, seemingly revenge for Russia's strike against Kyiv and Lviv the night before. As part of measures to reduce the offensive capabilities of the Russian aggressor, on the night of the 10th of January, units of the Ukrainian Defense Forces struck the Zhutovskaya oil depot, Oktyabrski district, Volgograd Oblast, Russian Federation, which is involved in supplying fuel to the occupying forces, Ukraine's General Staff reported. The General Staff confirmed that the target had been hit and that the extent of the damage was being assessed, and there was more. In addition to this attack, Ukraine also scored multiple successful strikes against Russian forces in occupied Ukraine. In Zaporizhia, Ukraine managed to hit a UAV storage facility believed to belong to Russia's 19th Motor Rifle Division. Ukraine also took aim at the portions of the embattled region of Donetsk that Russia holds. Several enemy targets were struck, the General Staff says, including a concentration of personnel of the 76th Air Assault Division, Kurakivka Settlement, a command and observation post of a unit from the Tank Battalion of the same division, Hirnik Settlement, and a command post of a unit from the 41st Army, Hirnik Settlement. Sticking with the Donetsk region, Ukraine also managed to score a direct hit on a UAV command and control point in the Pokrovsk region with its drones, underscoring the difference between how Ukraine and Russia approach their drone strikes. For Russia, long-range drones are weapons of terror designed to kill civilians and plunge them into freezing cold, inky darkness through attacks on energy infrastructure. But to Ukraine, drones are weapons that can be used to whittle away at Putin's war machine, as shown by Ukraine taking out targets that serve the military ahead of directly targeting Russia's cities. The strike against the Volgograd oil depot appears to have been confirmed by Russia. Prior to the General Staff posting its Telegram announcement, the Volgograd regional governor Andrei Bocharov also took to the social media platform to announce that a fire had broken out at the depot. Bocharov claimed that residents nearby may have to be evacuated to a local school, and he trotted out the same old excuse that Russia always seems to give when Ukraine hits targets with its long-range drones. It wasn't the drones themselves that did the damage, it was debris. Again, as though anybody believes that anymore. Kyiv Post adds that Ukraine may also have tried to target an oil refinery in the Krasnodar region, though the General Staff has yet to confirm or deny this attack. Missile and drone alerts sounded off in the region, the Kyiv Post reports, citing Russian Telegram channels as claiming. However, a lack of General Staff confirmation suggests that Ukraine didn't hit its target, which would likely have been the Slavyansk-on-Kuban refinery on this occasion. And there was one more region that Ukraine targeted in its brutal revenge strike. Earlier we mentioned that Ukraine doesn't target civilians with its long-range attacks, at least not deliberately. And while this is true, Ukraine is getting increasingly comfortable with the idea of bringing the pain of the war that Putin started back to the Russian people, with certain strikes that carry echoes of the brutal strategy that Russia has employed against Ukraine during the winter. The most recent of those strikes, upon which CNN reported on January 11th, snatched power away from tens of thousands of people across 1,000 buildings in Kyiv. This left many Ukrainians without heating at a time when the weather in the country is bitingly cold, with temperatures reaching -10 degrees Celsius or 14 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. Ukraine clearly felt that Russia's citizens needed to feel some of that pain, and they do thanks to another Ukrainian strike in the Belgorod region. Reported by Reuters, this strike reportedly left 600,000 residents of the Belgorod region without electricity, heating or water, per the region's governor, Vyacheslav Gladkov. The same governor claimed that work was underway to restore the lost utilities, but it's clear that this was yet another slice of Ukrainian revenge. Over a third of Belgorod's pre-war population of 1.5 million people are now feeling the pain that Russia causes Ukraine's civilians constantly, with strikes that Reuters claims cause rolling daily blackouts, along with the heating challenges that we mentioned earlier. In this case, what is good for the goose appears to have been good enough for the gander. However, that doesn't change the fact that Ukraine primarily strikes military targets inside Russia, and that it's doing so because Russia keeps on killing Ukraine's civilians. The January 9th Oreshnik, along with other missiles and drones, strike was far from an isolated incident, and 4 dead Ukrainian civilians, as tragic as those deaths are, pale in comparison to the sheer death and destruction that Russia has wrought on Ukraine's people during almost 4 years of war. The Ukrainian civilian death toll is now in the tens of thousands. At this point, any Ukrainian strike against a Russian target could be considered an act of justifiable revenge. Per Statista, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, or OHCHR, has revealed the scale of civilian death in Ukraine from the day that Putin launched his full-scale invasion up to July 31st, 2025. The OHCHR's confirmed casualties include 13,883 Ukrainian civilians dead during that period, 726 of whom were children. A further 35,548 civilians have been injured, of which 2,234 were children. As these are older figures, you can imagine that the numbers have gotten even higher since July 31st, 2025. In fact, the numbers that we do have may not even be 100% accurate. That's according to an August 11th, 2025 piece in the Kyiv Independent, which carries a headline claiming that the world has underestimated how many civilians Russia has killed since Putin started his invasion. It notes the OHCHR's official figure of around 13,000 civilians killed at the time of the article's creation. However, it adds that this number only refers to the deaths that have been double confirmed, with the Kyiv Independent adding that even the OHCHR believes that the true total may be higher. Mariupol alone could have seen more deaths than the OHCHR reports for Ukraine in total. Take Mariupol as a case in point. Before the war, it was home to nearly 450,000 people. After months of encirclement and bombardment in 2022, city officials estimated that 25,000 to 75,000 civilians had been killed. The Kyiv Independent says of one of the first cities that Putin's invaders targeted. If these estimates are accurate, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that Russia has killed 100,000 or more Ukrainian civilians in total, especially as Mariupol fell to Russia in May 2022, well over 3.5 years ago. The potential for the Ukrainian civilian death count to have reached that high certainly isn't hyperbolic, especially given that Russia appears to have ramped up its strikes against Ukraine's everyday people. In November 2025, the United Nations, or UN, reported that civilian casualties during the first 10 months of 2025 were substantially higher than those seen during all of 2024. Again, these would be confirmed casualties, with the UN noting that 2024 saw 9,112 confirmed Ukrainian civilian casualties. As for the first 10 months of 2025, the number was 12,062, and it likely grew higher as Russia battered Ukraine's cities and energy infrastructure with missile and drone strikes. In October 2025 alone, the UN confirmed the deaths of 148 civilians, along with a further 929 injuries. These deaths aren't accidents. This isn't Russia trying to hit military targets only to end up striking civilians. No, Russia is engaged in a pattern of striking against Ukraine's cities in the hope that it will kill civilians. Far from being accidents, these civilian deaths are all part of the plan to create such terror among Ukraine's people that they will beg their government and military to stop fighting. At least, that's how it's supposed to go in Putin's mind. And this terror campaign is only going to get worse. We've just seen that with a Russian strike that killed 4, injured 25, and included the second confirmed use of the Oreshnik on Ukraine's territory. Ukraine made Russia pay for that blood in the loss of yet more military assets. But what Ukraine saw on January 9th was a natural consequence of what RBC Ukraine reports as a series of new terror tactics being adopted by Russia. The outlet shared a Telegram post published by Bild's Russian language account, which states, "Russia has adopted a new tactic in its strikes against Ukraine, for the first time targeting facilities previously considered untouchable due to their key role in supporting the lives of millions of people. Such facilities include railway infrastructure, which Russia may have been previously trying to preserve with a view to future military use, and Ukraine's medical logistics." Bild notes an earlier attack on Lviv, in which a warehouse was destroyed, leaving 600 medical facilities without much-needed supplies. Add to this the constant strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, which Zelensky labeled as conscious, cynical Russian terror against the people on January 11th, and you have an inkling of what Putin has in store for Ukraine as it refuses to bow to his pressure. With its January 10th revenge strikes, Ukraine has shown that it's in no mood to bow. It's firing back, and the targets that it's destroying in response to Russia's attacks against civilians are all part of a massive machine that is being slowed every single time that Ukraine's drones take flight. Russia's leaders are war criminals for what they're doing in Ukraine, and Putin is top among them. Though Ukraine hasn't been able to eliminate Russia's leading war criminal, it has managed to take out others. Russia's war criminals thought they were safe until Ukraine hunted them down, as you'll discover in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of the aerial battle between Russia and Ukraine. And thank you as always for watching.